language has always interested me, and it's always fun to hear about and, watch the Discovery Channel about, the language of whales or the language of honeybees. And this is completely different, but we're talking about language by the human definition of it. I've received very, very good audio clips. One from Dave Polides, and I just finished transcribing that a couple days ago. That was California, and we're talking about 10 seconds here. But in that 10 seconds is enough that we can definitively say that this is language. I'll tell you that those two cuts, along with one other one that was sent to me by Kathy Strain, have some of the best linguistic evidence of any of the clips I've received. What I'm looking for is raw stuff. I know we've mentioned it, but raw stuff, not scrubbed or filtered or altered in any way. We're getting a lot more distortion than the clip has, when I put the headphones on and listen to it on my transcription program. So I'm sure to the average person out there, that sounds like nothing other than distortion. Let me read you what the transcription is. At 1 second point 82, one creature who is probably the farthest away from the microphone says, "Wet huli o tigratni." Now that's, spread out and kind of choppy compared to that, because it comes out in almost less than a second on the tape. Again, that's "Wet huli o tigratni." And that's followed up almost immediately at the timestamp of 4.54 with Izawane. You can tell that these are clearly two individuals because of the conversational turns are not even separated. They actually overlap. The second individual begins speaking before the first individual has stopped speaking. It's really hard for, I'm sure, most of your listeners to listen to that, and I'm sure most of them are saying in their minds that good God, how the hell did he get that? And so I have found that I almost have to sit somebody down side saddle with me with the headphones on in front of the equipment and take them through the whole process before they realize and get what's there. And then the last utterance comes at 6 seconds, 0.07, and it's spoken very quietly, almost whispered, in response to the second individual, I believe. Okay, and it is hai peti. Hai peti. Spoken very quickly and almost at a whisper. Okay, and another reason why I know that these are three individuals is you can tell from the recording that they are spoken from three different locations, different distances from the mic. This helps out a lot. Of course, we're trained to detect that kind of stuff.
It amazes me that we never heard it ourselves, that we were basically very near where we should have heard it, and yet we didn't hear this with our own ears.
Did you have a parabolic
microphone? Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why I always tell people, if you're in the woods, I can't tell you how many times I'm out there and I may not hear anything, but I'm recording. And you'll be surprised what you get when you do that. You'll pick up all those things that you missed, and it just adds to your outing. I mean, you may have had a few things happen, but then you get home and you start listening to this, and you say, wow, all this other stuff happened while we were there. This is great.
But I remember those other cuts that I listed for you were individual short morpheme streams with no conversational turns. And okay. I can tell you this, they're definitely speaking in a language that's unknown to me. Tell me, where were these recorded?
One of these was recorded due north of Atlanta.
What I can say, they're speaking in a language, an unknown language to me, and I have to say that I think if there was a language like that being spoken in the mountains of Georgia, that right. I would know about it. I will say one thing, too, about your specific clips. is that since you and I began talking, you've had a sense that there's a lot of Spanish in the language that you hear when you're out there just listening to them, and not listening to recordings or anything, just being out there playing your music or talking to them and getting the reactions that you get. You have always expressed to me that you feel they somehow understand that you're speaking in Spanish and that they answer you back in something very similar to that. And what I will tell you is that in those individual morpheme streams, you are right. It definitely does sound very much like Spanish. Mm-hmm. Yet it's not. It's not exactly Spanish. But you're right. In intonation and delivery, especially at real time, I can confirm that a lot of it really does sound like Spanish.
Spanish has been in Georgia longer than English has been here. Spanish was here from the 1500s to the mid-1850s in North Georgia through the mining that took place. The Spaniards mined that area, and then they were kicked out in the mid-1800s.
And that's the nature of language. Some creature that is so observant and communicative like that would naturally assimilate both Spanish and English.
I got a question for you, Scott. They wanted to know if you felt that Sasquatch slowed down their speech so that we can understand them better in some cases.
Yes. I can give you a very strong example of that, and that is Ron Moorhead's tape. He really felt that they were trying to slow their voices down and really communicate. And they were speaking in a single morpheme utterances, really. Almost as if they were, as if the creatures thought, well, we really have to speak slow and one word at a time in order to get these stupid humans to understand what we're saying.
I had that same experience that night in Northern California when I had the three of them around me. It was almost like they were, sitting there twisting their jaw to make me understand, whatever they could do. Just,
it's probably frustrating for them.
Yeah, I had to be. It was very frustrating for me trying to listen to, knowing I wasn't understanding,
What I can say about those is that their language, irrefutable. There's no linguist in the world that would argue with the fact that we're listening to language.
These are all areas where, we've had, Class B, Class A, and or the quintessential Sasquatch calls.
And we were trained in deception techniques. Absolutely. I've heard every deceptive technique the Russians ever tried to use, right? Including, gibberish. But you can tell. You can tell.
We've sent you stuff from Alabama as well, 2 different locations in Alabama. This is, I've sent you things from 3 or 4 different locations in Georgia. These are 4 different researchers. I wasn't present at all the recordings, nor were they present at all my recordings. So you've got a pretty good statistical sample there.
I've received stuff from Tennessee, from Kentucky, from Texas, from Oklahoma, from Minnesota, from Wisconsin. It adds up.
408, you're on the line. Do you have a question?
Alex, this is Dave Politis. I wanted to just put a window frame around the work he did for us on the tape recording. Specifically, that actually occurred in the Great Smoky Mountains when I was with Scott Carpenter in an area that he had been working extensively. And kind of the way it happened was we were on a path, a very, very worn path going up into the mountains. We were probably 2 miles from the parking lot, a sunny day, and out of nowhere, these loud sounds. And as I described them to Scott, they sounded like teenagers that were having an extremely good time, or they were anxious or upset about something, and I couldn't tell. And because Scott is the absolute epitome of a thorough researcher, he had his video tape recorder going, and he caught these sounds as we stood there on this trail dumbfounded. And we're guessing that it probably was no more than 100 to 200 feet from us down in a gully, and we were up sort of on a ridgeline.
Very clear. I wish you had the ability to play that for us right now. It's very clear and highly resonant. The first individual goes "Dela," and then one just screams out "Da dow, dow dow, ah ow," and then either the first individual or a third individual, I'm thinking it was the first individual, says "Bole ai." And some of that you can hear in real time, and some of it you can't. Certainly, the big screams, the big holler that sounds like it really does sound like a teenager. Dow 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 dow, ow, is very clear. And then the others you really have to retrieve them. You have to do a little bit of work to retrieve those other morphemes.
One of the points I want to make to everybody out there that may be listening is that the amazing part about this is that we weren't that far from the parking lot. We were on a trail that almost looked like a freeway. It's used by probably 100 people a day. And this is also in an area that Scott had been working for a number of years, where we've got dozens and dozens of DNA samples out of an area where we've been trapping for the DNA. So the thought, I mean, you always hear about people, I got to go deep in the woods for this and that. Hey, we've talked about this at length, Scott and I, and we actually believe that they're sitting right there on the trailhead watching.
For sure they have scouts sitting there.
I will say, even though this might be a place that is maybe frequented by teenagers, these were not human teenagers. The qualities, the characteristics of the utterances were not human.
Oh, and I can guarantee that the area that the sounds emanated from, you and I could take probably an hour to bushwhack our way through heavy brush to get there. It was just an impossible area to get into.
Scott, are you saying that this is its own distinct language?
I have some experience outside of my naval career dealing with populations that have what they would consider a secret language. Okay, I'm talking about the Romano Gypsies. Okay, so from that experience and knowing the nature of language and knowing that Sasquatch, one of the biggest concerns for Sasquatch, we assume, is the avoidance of people and what I would have to assume is that Sasquatch speaks an assimilated language that includes Spanish, English, and Native American, depending on where they are, but that they also have their own basic language that they could speak like many, like most humans really can speak in more than one language. And there's no reason in the world why Sasquatch can't do that as well. But I know that for populations, and it's not just the Romano Gypsies that do this, and throughout history, as peoples have been studied, when a people wants to remain secretive, one of the best ways that they can do that is to have a means of communication that no one else can understand.
Right, like the wind talkers in World War II.
Yes, exactly. Language is a living entity that evolves and changes. We would assume that would Sasquatch in Georgia be speaking a different dialect than Sasquatch in Washington State? Yeah, we'd have to assume that, but I would say that they also have a common language that they could both understand at the same time. And the only thing that would preclude that from happening is extreme isolation. And we know that Sas is so migratory, is so fast, can travel such great distances, that I don't believe that type of isolation exists for them. They have to be able to understand each other.
And I just had a question.
To truly discover them as a people, I believe it's in contact. I don't think it's in having a body. How do we understand a Sasquatch? By collecting a body, a specimen.
You say one thing, one property that a language has to have is that it has to be learnable. So
yes.
For me, it's really exciting to think that one day we could learn this language. I know you're just transcribing it now,
Absolutely.
And you can't say this is translated to mean this exactly, but just in like your wildest dreams, I'm interested to know what you imagine that to look like, how we will someday be able to learn their language.
I think we will be able to learn how to communicate with them someday. I don't think we will ever learn their language because I think secrecy and self-preservation will always be important to them. So kind of, I can again use the example of the Romano Gypsies. I think they will always keep part of their language, secret to themselves. But I think if nothing else, they will be able to communicate with us through our own language. So it will be, an effort on both our parts to try to learn a little bit about each other. We may end up communicating in what we would call a pidgin, which is half human and half Sasquatch.
I know that they, when you speak to them, they understand because they've responded to me accordingly on too many occasions. Whether I spoke their language or not, and it doesn't really matter. I know that they understood what I was saying. I
agree. It may not be an issue of learning their language. It's just an issue of being able to talk to them.
I know from experience how deep the inroads can go with somebody when you can just throw out a couple words even that they understand. It's like you're trying. It shows them that you're trying.
The first thing I try to do when I go out and up there at the original camp is I go out there and I read from the original transcripts. My first intention is to let them know that I'm trying to communicate to them in their own language. They have to know I have no clue as to what I'm saying, but I'm making an effort. And that's meaningful to all people. I have gotten numerous responses, especially what I am referring to as an acquiescence snarl, and I can do it for you. It's pretty easy. It's a huh and then a snarl. It's a and I believe this to be almost like a gift. What they are doing is they're letting you know that they're there and that they're listening. And that's probably as far as they're going to go with you. And I've heard so many witnesses describe almost that exact thing. You don't hear anything from a Sasquatch that he does not want you to hear. Mm-hmm. I don't think that you trick them into, responding to you with call blasting or anything like that.
No, not at all.
Or certainly not at close range. I think that's why I call this an acquiescence. Or they are accepting the fact that they understand you're trying to communicate with them, and they're giving you a gift.
Do you have any speculation as to why you think that they are much less adverse to having their audio recorded than they seem to be to ever letting their picture be taken?
Well, we can use American Indians for an example of that. American Indians felt that a photograph captured a part of their spirit. We modern, species-centric humans think that how can they possibly understand what photographs even are? But who are we to say? Humans going into their backyard and setting up a trail cam is like, I believe that we take 2 steps into the forest, and they know exactly what's going on. I'll tell you that I also have some. It's one of the most interesting parts, really, of the Barry tape. Is we have one of the beings very plainly chuckling to himself. And it almost sounds like joop, 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 almost as if he told a joke and he's laughing at his own joke. I've had some local people here that had no idea I was even involved in this tell me stories about they heard singing coming from parts of the forest that it would be could not be any humans over there. I can also tell you that part of the Moorhead tape that has a female Sasquatch on there, and she is sort of chanting the same word over and over, but in a very sing-song intonation. So that, yes, I've heard of the idea of them singing. Why would they not? What people of the forest that we've ever documented do not sing? If you've got something, absolutely, I want to hear it. If they're singing, I can transcribe it. I can get morphemes off of that. The last 3 years going up into that camp, and believe me, this is not easy because I have to carry this bull run drum up there with me. It's an old, ancient Irish drum that has roots going back to Central Asia. It's so old. So I took this up there, and I play it for the purpose of entertaining, really, and just to let them know that I'm there and I'm attempted communication. And for 4 mornings in a row, when we woke up, we heard it begin, and I hadn't been drumming. I always drummed it in the evening before we went to bed. So we would wake up, we'd start our morning fire and start getting some coffee. Me and Ron would get some coffee and start cooking some oatmeal or something for, Stephen. We're just kind of waking up and stretching and everything, and we'd start hearing in one direction in the forest. We'd just start hearing a tap, 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 and then we'd kind of, our ears would kind of perk up, and Ron would say, "Oh, that's a woodpecker." Well, that's a weird woodpecker. Then because it was a quiet tapping. It didn't sound like a woodpecker. Plus, it's almost rhythmic. And then from the opposite direction in the forest, we hear the same type of tapping rhythm. It's rhythmic. And then from a third position, we were surrounded by woodpeckers that were not pecking a tree, but were somehow tapping on the tree in a rhythmic pattern, and they were trading off. And when you added all 3 rhythms up together, it was exactly the rhythm of doubling the stick on a bullring drum.
It's a vibrational hum type of thing that they do, and they do it on different levels, or notes, if you want to call it that. And I've heard them do that with a rattle too. With that rattle interspersed. And the rattles that we've audioed, because I make rattles and I use rattles, I know, rattles, how they sound, and it's very definite a rattle that would shake and not some other, type of sound. So, but yeah, they do, I've heard them do a vibrational hum too, that's a variation of notes.
How many hundreds of years could they have been observing Native Americans, doing that same thing?
Vibrational chanting and humming goes back, far past this continent to, other lands.
They have language that we have to assume they have everything else that language implies, to include emotions, morals, culture. I hear an argument all the time that, well, how can you, by some of the biologists in the field, but they don't have culture. Of course they have culture. Language itself implies culture. Culture means that you learn something from your parents and you teach it to your children. Language, more than anything else, implies that. Now, do they have material culture? Do they create fire, or do they make weapons or tools?
They create art. They create art.
Absolutely. And we've already talked about it. Music. That's culture.
Yeah,
it might not be what anthropologists want to define as material culture, well, hell, they don't build buildings. They don't need to, probably. We have to assume.
Right.
So they may not have material culture, but they have culture. Yeah, we define cultures by their language. You have the Spanish culture, you have the Russian culture. We define cultures by their language. So to say that, the SAS does not have culture, it's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, again, I didn't document this so well because it just amazed me at the time, but I put out a cross of rocks, and they changed it to a Trinity symbol with those rocks. It's more like a Celtic Trinity symbol because they only had so many rocks, and then they went so far as to take leaf litter, mash it together in the form of those 3 footballs to make a Trinity symbol. So, that people always say, oh, they're just mimicking you and doing this and that and the other. That's not mimicking. That's translating one symbol to an entirely different symbol. It means the same thing.
Yep. Up at the Sierra camp, me and Stevie and Ron, numerous times have in our daily hikes, have come upon symbols, that rocks placed in precise order that look like a sun cross, or like the Celtic cross. A cross, an equilateral cross with a circle around it. Say that's an American Indian symbol as well, right?
Yes, it is. It is. The 4 directions cross is a part of what we consider the wheel of life.